Welcome to this School System 2020 workshop. I'm Karen Miles, Executive Director at Education Resource Strategies. We work with school system leaders to help them organize people, time, and money to create great schools at scale. This workshop is aimed at sharing the results of a 2-year project funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to look at the ways in which large urban districts are organizing to support teacher professional growth and to improve teaching effectiveness. This project included 3 big pieces. The first was an in-depth study of how 3 urban school systems spend and organize resources to support teachers. The second is a series of case studies looking at innovative practices in teacher professional growth. And the third are a set of tools that are aimed at supporting school systems in analyzing their current use of resources and to think differently about creating a more strategic system. It's a wonderful time to be doing this work. There's an increased demand for investment in professional growth. The rollout of Common Core standards is going to create a huge need for professional development so teachers can understand what the new common standards are going to require and so they can create a common language and approach to dealing with it. Secondly, the big focus on revising teacher evaluation and implementing more rigorous systems is going to also demand more emphasis on professional growth because we're going to know more about what teachers need to do in order to improve. In addition, we have more and better student assessment data. That's going to also create demand for professional growth because we're going to see where we need to improve. The beauty is also that the same data will help us understand whether what we did to try to improve our teaching actually worked. So it will enable a much tighter connection between our activities and student improvement. Third, technology enables a whole new range of ways to deliver professional growth opportunities through remote coaching, through sharing of lessons using networks, and even through videos that are linked up with specific skill areas or lessons. And finally, we're all still under significant financial constraint, which is a blessing in some ways in that it enables us to look really critically at all that we've done before. But it's also a constraint in other ways in that we have to make sure that we're not doing anything that isn't paying off or integrated. There's quite a bit of research on what makes for good professional development, but almost no literature whatsoever on what do school systems who have success in building teacher effectiveness do in the area of professional growth and teacher support. So in order to think about the overall system strategy, we need to think about how professional growth fits in to the whole set of activities that a system does to build teaching effectiveness. So this chart is very complicated, but it's also a key concept that we hope carries through the entire presentation and to the whole way that you think about building teaching effectiveness. So it's worth spending a minute on it. The first thing you'll notice on this is that there are some boxes that are different shades of purple. So we'll be focusing in the rest of this presentation on those purplish boxes. The dark purple refers to professional growth spending, and the light purple refers to what we call teacher support, things that help teachers do a better job, like curriculum materials, but aren't necessarily specifically aimed at building their knowledge and skills. So with that quick introduction, I'll just give you the big outlines of all the pieces we feel like need to fit together and what needs to drive what. And the way we think about this is to begin with what it is that we know that high-performing schools do to continuously improve teaching effectiveness. The first thing they do is that they have very clear standards for student learning that are defined at the subject and grade level. And they also have clear standards for what good instruction looks like in their school. And these standards drive everything else. There are 3 big categories of activity that need to be considered in creating a strategic professional growth plan. The first is hiring assignment. Obviously, if you don't get the right people and the right combinations into your school, that changes everything that follows. The second are the set of things you do to improve as an organization. This refers to all the things you do collectively to build knowledge and understanding. There are 4 sets of activities in there. The first is how the school is designed, how it's staffed, how time is used, and how students and teachers are grouped together to create individual attention. We've done a lot of work at ERS on school design. If you want to learn more about how that connects to professional growth, please check out our tools in that area. The other three categories in organizational improvement include curriculum materials and supports, the assessment and data systems that link to those, and then professional growth that links to those two categories. The last category of activities is what we call individual growth. Those are activities aimed at building each individual teacher's skills over their career. This category is referring to things you're doing that are specifically aimed at an individual teacher to support a movement over their career path or to build on particular strengths the teacher might have or weaknesses that they have. The three big buckets of activity under individual growth include how career path and compensation are structured, how teacher performance is evaluated, and then what sort of professional growth opportunities exist that link to those two buckets. And the final piece strategic systems need to think about is what are the accountability systems that they put in place to make sure all of these pieces are resulting in improved practice and ultimately in improved student performance. We use this framework to inform the way we did our analysis of spending and organization of these three systems. This analysis has led us to identify 6 steps to a more strategic professional growth system that we think most urban school systems will have to undertake. So step 1 is to quantify the current spending on the universe of professional growth and teacher support. When we say professional growth spending, we include 3 big categories. The first is what we call direct professional growth, and this is probably what you're thinking of when you came to this presentation. It's how much is spent on traditional training and conferences, how much is spent on coaching, expert support, dollars that go to pay substitutes that are covering teacher time to go to conferences or professional development activities, tuition reimbursement, sabbaticals if you're one of those lucky districts that still offers those. And then the last piece, which many districts don't quantify, is monetized time for all the staff that are on the district or system books that provide professional growth. The second big category is time spent by teachers in professional growth activities. Here, we didn't try to capture every last minute that any teacher might spend building their own knowledge. We instead defined it by saying what time is supported or required by the system for professional growth activities. So this would include things like professional development days that are defined in the teacher work calendar, to go to periods that are free during the day or after the school day that are used for teacher collaboration or professional growth. And the last category that we include in professional growth spending is the portion of compensation spending that goes to pay for lanes or accumulated credits. Most traditional salary structures have raises for salary based on getting more credits. And the rationale for including them is that that's really directly paying teachers for gaining more skills and knowledge. So if you're using this as a group activity, you might press pause here and stop and discuss 2 questions. The first would be, what do you think are the top 10 professional growth spending items within your school district? Literally just with your group, sit down and say, what are the big things we're doing to build professional growth, and list those activities. Then roughly say, which ones do you think cost the most? The second is, do you think spending on lanes and teacher time in your district will be at the top of that list? When you're done with that, start up again and we'll share the results from the 3 systems that we look deeply at. This chart shows total spending on professional growth in 3 urban school systems. Duval County, Florida, which is Jacksonville and represents our largest urban school system. The second is Washington, D.C., and the third is Achievement First, which is a charter management organization that serves free and reduced lunch students in New York City and New Haven, Connecticut. The first thing you notice is that the total spending varies between 7% and 14% of the entire operating budget. I'm thinking that sounds like a pretty large number to folks that are looking at this. When you look at just the direct PD spending, you can see it's about 4% in each of these school systems. Where the big variation is in how much these systems are devoting to pay for teacher time and to pay the extra compensation that goes toward credits. So big variation, something to think about as you do your strategy. If you look at the second bar, the green bars, you'll see that the spending on teacher support activities, which we've defined as spending on curriculum support, teacher evaluation, and assessment, ranges between about 1% to 2%. So if you add those things together, there's a pretty significant total spend down here in terms of dollars per pupil and dollars per teacher to build teaching effectiveness through professional growth and teacher support activities. Clearly, you can see why it would be important to understand the current spend before figuring out what new to add on. Step 2 is to capitalize on mandates and growing investments in Common Core standards, student assessment systems, and teacher evaluation to create integrated systems for professional growth. When we say integration, we're talking about the integration that needs to happen between curriculum assessment, teacher evaluation, and professional growth. This chart explains some of those connections. If you read more deeply into the paper, you can see how Achievement First in particular has organized its entire professional growth system in order to be able to make these tight connections. Let's look at each as we go. Looking at curriculum first. Curriculum derives the assessment topics and metrics. The student results on assessment actually feeds back. It should feed back into curriculum. Because as we learn that students aren't mastering the material, it may inform different materials or different orders of the curriculum. Assessment then needs to contribute to teacher evaluation scores, which need to feed into what is the professional growth that is provided to each individual teacher. Assessment also feeds directly into professional growth because it helps to target the areas that teachers need to be teaming together on working on, where professional development needs to be built. And clearly, curriculum needs to inform professional growth, since we know from research that the most powerful professional growth activities happen in the context of the specific content, material, and lessons that teachers need to engage with. Because many school systems are increasing their level of investment in teacher evaluation, we wanted to focus especially on this link between teacher evaluation and professional growth. This chart quantifies the spending on teacher evaluation and the portion of professional growth spending that goes for the teacher debrief that's part of the teacher evaluation. Let's look first at the green. Duval County, at the time of this study, had not yet implemented a new, more rigorous teacher evaluation system. So if that's where your system is, you're probably spending about $50 or so per teacher to do the observation of teachers, to document those results, and to administer the teacher evaluation system. Both DC and Achievement First have been implementing a much more rigorous high-stakes evaluation system for the last 2 years at the time of this study. Interestingly, here you can see that spend then jumps up from about $50 per teacher to about $1,000 a teacher spent to observe teachers and to capture and document the results of that evaluation. The purple portion of the bar shows the amount of spending in DC and Achievement First that is devoted to the debriefing of the results of the teacher evaluation. It's not the whole amount spent on professional growth for individual teachers at all. It's just how have they organized the delivery of those results. And what you can see through this chart is that both districts invest to debrief those results with teachers. Achievement First invests more than twice as much in the coaching time that's spent to share those results with teachers. And this is a function of many more meetings and longer ones that are happening to share the result of observations. As school systems begin to invest more in the scorekeeping part of teacher evaluation, where they're collecting data on how teachers are doing and scoring them using certain rubrics, they need to also think about how they're balancing that with investment to help teachers grow their knowledge and skills using that. Step 3, leverage expert support to guide teacher teams who share instructional content. There's a lot packed into this relatively short sentence, and I'm going to spend the next few charts trying to unpack that for you. This chart looks at how much these 3 systems spent on direct PG that was aimed at organizational improvement. What you can see from this chart is that these 3 systems spend the huge bulk of their professional growth dollars to pay for coaches. coaches are a research-based strategy for providing job-embedded support for teachers that makes a lot of sense in school systems or schools that don't have a large percentage of their teachers who are effective or highly effective. It's a way to bring expertise from the outside and infuse it into a school system. We're seeing high-performing schools shift this spending from specific coach positions to pay expert teacher leaders to provide professional growth in the context of their everyday work on teams. Let's talk about teacher teams for a bit. Why are they so powerful? First of all, 2 heads are better than 1. Research shows that teachers like teaming. The AFT recently conducted a study where it showed that Generation Y teachers choose the schools they work in based on how much collaboration is happening. Highly effective teams are critical to figuring out ways to target time and attention to meet individual student needs, and also to informing the revamping of curriculum to better teach to standards. And finally, teaming improves teacher effectiveness. There's a growing body of research that's showing that even low effective teachers who are on teams with average or highly effective teachers can consistently perform better than others. But all teams are not created equal in terms of improving student performance, even though there are a host of different kinds of teams that are critical to create in schools. Across this chart, you can see 3 different types of teams. Some teams share students but not content. So this would be, let's say, the 6th grade middle school team that might include an English, math, social studies, and science teacher. They share the same students, but they teach very different content. There are vertical teams. Those would be teams that teach the same subject, but they teach it over different grades. And it's important that these teachers work together so that they're connecting teaching from one year to the next. And the last type of teacher team would be teams that share content, that actually share the specific lessons that they're working on together. And then we look at the purpose of collaboration down the left-hand side. And what you can see as you examine this chart is that it's the teaching teams who share content that have the most to gain, both in terms of student performance and their own productivity and knowledge from working together. So it's very important that schools be organized and that the teacher workday and calendar be organized in such a way that each of these kinds of teams gets to meet at the frequency and amount that they need to meet. And so here we've just suggested, based on looking at a lot of different highly performing schools, what seems to be needed in order for each of these groups to be effective. The next chart looks at whether these systems organize professional growth spending, either direct spending or in time, on teacher teams. So let's see to what extent these 3 systems aim professional growth spending at teams. This chart shows that these 3 systems organize professional growth spending to support 3 kinds of activities: system program implementation, teacher teaming, and then whole school improvement kinds of activities. So talking first about the system program implementation, this would be professional development aimed across, let's say, all teachers implementing the new 1st grade curriculum. That would be a system-wide program implementation. The teacher team category would be professional growth activities or time that was aimed at supporting the specific team inside a school, the 1st grade team at the Edwards Elementary School. Their time spent planning together and learning together about the curriculum and students they're teaching. And the 3rd category would be whole school professional growth that would be aimed at whole school-wide planning and learning. What this chart shows is that only Achievement First devotes significant resources to supporting and creating time for teacher teams. So at this point, you might pause and take a few minutes to talk about to what extent are teachers systematically organized to collaborate within teams that share lessons or students? And if not, what are the barriers to creating teams of teachers that engage in collaborative planning time? Step 4 is to support growth throughout a teacher's career by restructuring teacher compensation and career path. This chart takes a look at spending in a typical urban school district on compensation. So in this district, they spent $500 million in total on compensation. That was divided between spending on the base salary, which is what teachers would earn right when they start, spending on increases for education credits, which we've been calling lanes throughout this presentation, spending for extra years of teaching, spending for taking on more responsibilities or getting better student results, and then spending on teacher benefits. So what you can see when you look at this is that, first of all, systems aren't spending a whole lot to reward teachers for taking on extra responsibilities or getting better results. And secondly, at least in this district, they're spending quite a bit to pay teachers for more years and also to pay for extra education credits, neither of which has consistently been shown to link to student improvement. We have a significant set of resources around teacher compensation where you can go and look at a whole lot more on this particular subject and the research that backs up this claim. Here, we just want to point out and focus in on the dollars spent on teacher education credits because this potentially represents a huge opportunity for freeing resources to either pay for teacher leadership roles, which could also go to support teaming, or to pay higher compensation based on taking on new responsibilities or having higher levels of performance. Step 5. Add and optimize time to address organizational priorities as well as individual needs. This chart shows how many hours each of these three systems devoted to non-instructional hours for teachers and how much of it they captured for collective learning. What you can see on this chart is that each of the districts devoted a significant percentage of the teacher hours to non-instructional kinds of activities. This could be release time, this could be extra duties, or it could be planning time and professional development days. But only Achievement First captured a significant portion of this for professional growth and collaboration. The second thing that you'll note is if you look at the numbers below the bars, you'll see the total annual non-instructional hours are very different between Duval and DC and Achievement First, which has almost twice as many non-instructional hours than either DC or Duval. Because they're a charter management organization, they have been able to have a longer school day and a longer school year. They start 3 weeks before school begins and they have a 190-day student year. This obviously translates into more teacher work hours. So they're capturing a larger percent of the non-instructional hours for collective learning and they have more of them. It will be critical as systems go forward to try to figure out how to implement Common Core and to promote teacher teaming, to figure out how to free more of the time. And the first place to start will be to look at how to use existing time more effectively. We've created tools that you can look at that will help you do a quick calculation of your instructional and non-instructional time, or do a much more detailed quantification of your investment in time. Just to give you a sense of what that tool will enable you to do, this chart shows you how each of the three systems structures its non-instructional time. So the light blue would be individual teacher planning time. The green is collaborative planning time during the day. The orange is time that's during the school year but after the instructional day. That could be early release time on certain days, or it could just be certain days a week that they have a couple of hours that they work after the school day. And then the blue is the time before the school year starts. You might also have a bar that is time after the school year ends. Since time is going to be so important, you might pause here to think about how much time you do have. We have worksheets as part of this tool set that you can find on our website that will help you with these calculations. The first set of questions is to estimate the amount of time that you have in your district for collaboration and how much of your non-instructional time you're using in that way. And the second set of discussions is, are there ways you could make better use of the time you already have, and what are the barriers to doing that? Step 6, overhaul legacy contracts and policies and make strategic trade-offs. Throughout this presentation, we've talked about redefine teacher roles, to think differently about teacher compensation, and to think differently about teacher work time. The reason we were able to see such different practices at Achievement First, which is a charter management organization, and to see so much more integration between the different components of its teaching effectiveness strategy is because they've been able to do all this just over the last 7 years. So they didn't have to deal with the old practices, contracts, regulations, and traditions. If existing systems are going to rethink the professional role of teachers and to devote more time to collective learning, they will not be able to do this without overhauling existing contracts and policies. We would maintain that unless they do so, they will not be able to compete with the charter management kinds of organizations that can much more nimbly connect the different pieces of an overall teaching effectiveness strategy, and that this will be critical to serving our nation's urban children. The second piece, which we didn't touch a lot on, but which will be critical and is also linked to the overhauling of contracts and policies, will to be to rethink the design of schools. As we've said, that's how teachers are assigned and grouped, how students and teachers are grouped to get individual attention, and how time is organized. And throughout this presentation, I hope you've seen how important it's going to be to think differently about the schedules and about who works with who and who's providing guidance to whom. The last piece will be to leverage technology to lower the cost of professional growth. One of the things we didn't share in this presentation, but that you'll find when you look at our white paper describing these findings, is that the vast majority of the spending in professional growth in traditional district pays for staff positions. And so this is part of the difficulty of shifting resources in a traditional district to support new purposes, because they're tied up in specific individuals who've had specific roles and have a certain set of skills. One of the ways we're going to get more bang for the buck is going to be to leverage technology, but this will require rethinking the roles and the mix between people and technology. And then the last piece is to think carefully about this transition and which resources you're devoting to supporting transition versus the ongoing professional development expense that needs to be part of any highly effective school or school system. Hopefully there will continue to be funding for the transition kinds of support to support new teacher evaluation and Common Core. But even if there isn't, it's going to be important for school systems to break out and be specific about which dollars are going to support very new practices and transition to those new practices, and which are going to be part of your ongoing structure where all high-performing organizations invest consistently in professional growth and teaching support. We hope you've enjoyed this short presentation and it's piqued your interest to go more deeply into the tools and materials that we have around this topic. Please reach out to us and let us know what you want to know more about, what you've learned, and what actions you're taking based upon it.